Far-right hero and thorn in the side of the EU, Viktor Orban just lost big in Hungary. Yet Hungary's economy is in the drain, and Orban's ultra-wealthy friends still control the judiciary and the media. So, what's next for Hungary? Can Peter Magyar purge the illiberal deep state Orban left behind, and can he save Hungary's economy? Or will he just be like Macron or Trudeau, a disappointing reformer? Or perhaps even like Putin or Erdogan, a promised liberal reformer who is actually just the next strongman? To answer these questions, we need to do a quick recap of how Orban lost. Most political analysts believe that Orban lost primarily for two reasons. First, after initially bringing unemployment down by a lot after getting elected in 2010, Hungary's economy under Orban has performed quite a bit worse than comparable East European economies. For example, Hungarian wages have stayed far behind comparable countries, such as, for example, Poland, but also many other countries in the EU, since 2008. What's worse, after a massive COVID spending spree, a rise in energy prices, and the depreciation of the forint, Hungary has suffered the worst inflation crisis in all of Europe under Orban. The second reason analysts often mention is that the scale of corruption under Orban was just getting too much. For example, Orban's rich friends, such as his childhood friend, and I hope I pronounced it correctly, Lorenc Mészáros, who just so happens to have become Hungary's richest man since meeting Orban, have won up to 25% of all state contracts, coincidentally, in the years after Orban was elected. But the thing is, it's easy to accept corruption if everyone is getting richer. But if the economy is stagnating, if inflation is eating away at people's salaries, then too blatant corruption can really tick off your voters. So ticked off, in fact, that despite spending years to rig the political system in his favor by changing voting districts and despite controlling Hungary's entire traditional media landscape like radio and TV, Orban's government had just gotten so blatantly bad at his job and so blatantly corrupt that it did not matter anymore. His far-right Fidesz party, which used to have a supermajority in 2022, now lost badly to the conservative Peter Magyar and his TISA party. The only other party that cleared the 5% voting threshold to get into parliament was the far-right Mi Hazánk party. And the rest is just Orban and Peter Magyar. And that's a real problem for Orban because he had manipulated the voting system in such a way that it benefited the biggest party, even more than it always did. And this is how, with just 44.87% of the vote, Orban got a so-called supermajority in 2014, which allowed him to rewrite the constitution to give both his party more power and to enrich themselves and to entrench themselves by creating a massive deep state of Fidesz loyalists, which could only be removed by a supermajority, such as the president, who can refer any bill to be approved by the Constitutional Court, which consists of not one, not two, but 15 Fidesz loyalists. The next part of the deep state is the so-called Fiscal Council, which could nuke any new government budget at any moment. Fourth, there is the Prosecutor General, who can choose to try to prosecute TISA officials while protecting Fidesz oligarchs. And finally, element number 5, there is the Media Authority, which ensures the media remains loyal to Orban. These deep state defenses were why it was so important that Magyar not just won, but rather that he won by a landslide. And ironically, Hungary's unfair electoral system that benefits the biggest party helped him to do it, turning 53% of the vote into the 2/3 supermajority that he needs to dismantle most of these elements of Orban's deep state, at least in theory. Because honestly, this is also where expectations need to be realistic. These institutions are not empty shells. You're dealing with people, networks, and incentives built over 16 years of Orban rule. Replacing laws is fast. Changing how the system actually behaves is much slower. So this is a turning point. But it's the start of a process, not the end. On top of that, while Orban probably did not expect to lose by this much, he still left behind some more insurance by privatizing major parts of the state into independent trusts and institutions controlled by Fidesz loyalists such as the Foundation for Hungarian Culture, several university trusts, and the state oil giant MOL New Europe Foundation. So there's the NGO and trusts part of his defense, and then there's also the second part of his defense, which is that Fidesz oligarchs still control some of Hungary's biggest corporations, such as the massive MBH Bank and 4iG Telecom Group. So even if Magyar and his two-third majority is able to purge the official government, he still inherits a government that is much weaker than the one that Orban inherited in 2010. And this is important because Hungary's economy is a mess. Specifically, it's still one of Europe's poorest countries, with, despite Orban spending about 5% of GDP on boosting fertility rates, and it seemed to work initially, now fertility has fallen back to its all-time low levels, far below replacement rates. And combined with Orban's ultra-strict immigration policies, it means that Hungary's population is steadily falling, while those of neighboring countries are rising. Combine this spending with what many have argued was essentially vote buying, and it's no surprise that Hungary's government deficit is one of the worst in the EU. While inflation and borrowing costs are some of the highest in the EU. So, other than cutting corruption, which we have discussed will be quite difficult, Magyar's government is simply starting from a very weak position when it comes to the economy. But on the bright side, promising to restore the rule of law will gradually unlock about 22 billion euro in EU funding. So, not surprisingly, Hungary's currency, the forint, has rallied on the news that Peter Magyar won. So all in all, to answer our question, what's next? For Hungary, their new Prime Minister Peter Magyar has a supermajority he needs to begin the difficult process of dismantling Orban's deep state. Yet, Orban has built some pretty impressive defenses to defend his oligarch friends. And on top of that, a severely weakened Hungarian government is borrowing like crazy, while the economy is stagnant and people are leaving the country in droves. That's really not an easy situation to come back from. Yet when it comes to liberals, especially in the EU, they are hopeful. Hopeful that Magyar has signaled that he'd break with Orban's policy of aligning himself with the people who want to see the EU gone. Like both Trump and Putin, who wanted him to win this election. EU liberals are hopeful that Hungary will stop blocking aid to Ukraine. Hopeful that Hungary's democratic backsliding will be reverted. That the EU will remain a collective of not just free democracies, which Hungary clearly was, given that Orban lost by a landslide, but more so that the EU will now be a collective of free and fair democracies, where the media is independent from the ruling party and where judges are independent. In summary, they hope the EU will again be a collective of liberal democracies, free plus fair. But whether or not that will be the case will not just be a matter of how easy Orban's deep state can be dismantled. It will not just be a matter of whether or not the economy can be saved. It will also be a matter of what Peter Magyar wants. Because he can say that he wants to stop democratic backsliding, but I think it's important to keep in mind that Orban himself started out as a liberal. Erdogan in Turkey started out as a pro-EU democracy reformer. Heck, even Vladimir Putin started out as a reformer who EU countries were quite hopeful about. Peter Magyar is a staunch conservative that started out as an Orban ally. So will the Orban deep state truly be dismantled, or will he just take it over? Time will tell. And in the meantime, if you want to dig deeper, I highly recommend that you check out the excellent analysis by our advertising sponsor, The Economist, which I always check out for the research process of my videos. For this episode in particular, I highly recommend that you start with their analysis on how opposition movements all around the world can learn from Hungary's experience. And then follow up with this article about how Orban's government has perfected spreading its populist ideology to the wider world. And then finally, I recommend you check out their podcast episode on how Hungary's opposition leader, Peter Magyar, became so successful. I think, as these examples show, The Economist delivers insight that can help you see the bigger picture and think for yourself. This is why I almost always rely on their analysis for my research, and it is why I highly recommend that you subscribe. I'm excited to say that they're offering a special 35% discount for Money and Macro viewers right now. And whether you prefer their daily journalism in the Economist app, or you're like me and enjoy catching up on the global economy over the weekend with a nice cup of coffee and the print edition, you'll always stay on top of the latest global developments and support journalism that values factual information, integrity, and an independent point of view. So, don't miss out. Click the link in the description below or head over to economist.com/moneymacro to claim your exclusive 35% discount today.